He is arguably one of Australia's most esteemed disability advocates, and he's going to answer all of your questions.
You're listening to a special broadcast for the International Day for People with a Disability with Bradon Jackson and Jackson Hughes on ABC Radio Queensland.
Now, in October, Jackson and I came up with the idea to create a very special broadcast for the International Day of People with a Disability. And our flagship piece for this project was to give you a direct line to the NDIS. Now, conversations have been had since October to decide who would come on the program from the multi-billion-dollar National Insurance Scheme. Now, in November 12th, a newly appointed CEO of the NDIA was appointed. His name is Graham Head. And since then, discussions have deteriorated whether who would come on the program to speak with us here on ABC Sunshine Coast and ABC Gold Coast to speak with myself, Bradon Jackson, and Jackson Hughes. But last Thursday, unfortunately, the NDIA did pull out of their invitation to come on this very special broadcast today. We also reached out to the Federal Health Minister, Mark Butler, to see if he would like to come onto the program, but he did not reply to our invitation. But negativity aside, we are all positivity here on the International Day for People with a Disability. And look, I'm going to be biased because the guest we have is someone who knows the NDIS inside and out. It knows the benefits and the harms that it really does have on the Australian disability landscape. And his name is River Knight. He's the co-founder of Developing Australian Communities. And look, in my eyes, I got 6% vision, but I reckon my eyes are pretty good. He is one of Australia's top disability advocates. River Knight, thank you for coming on our broadcast this morning.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Now, River, today is an incredible day. What does today mean for you personally, before we get into our listeners' questions?
Well, for me personally, it's an excuse to get the community to recognise and remember, not just when the Paralympics is on, but actually between Olympics, that people living with disability are a huge part of our community, and we need to stop, take stock, get rid of the spin, maybe just shy away from all that political discussion you hear, and just talk about living with disability and how much a part of our community it is.
And that is it. Well, it's over 5 million people in Australia live with a disability, 1 in 6. So many of you listening right across the Sunshine Coast and Gold Coast, you may have a disability, you may know someone who has a disability, and the reality is, when you're over the age of 65, you are 59% more likely to acquire a disability later in life. So you may not want to know the answers to these questions right now, but later in life, keep them in your back pocket because you may need them. Now, River, I have plenty of questions that I'd like to put to you, but I've let the ABC radio community put these questions for you to answer. Let's hear from Judy first, see what her first question is.
My name's Judy and I live in Wollongabba. Do people get taken on holidays on the NDIS? I don't know. I've heard that.
So the question, River, and we'll turn up your headset in just a second, but the question that we played was, do people get sent on holidays on the NDIS?
Well, NDIS does not fund holidays. They fund out-of-home supports when you may be living with a carer, living at home, living with a family member, and you need to have that break. And you're not able to live in your normal setting. So they do fund what we used to call respite. NDIS changed it to short-term accommodation. Now we've changed it back to respite again. So the idea is that, you go out of your normal living situation. They fund that support and those staff to allow you to be supported somewhere else. Also maybe give a carer a break. But the way you do that, it doesn't have to be that feed and water plant approach. Like, you can actually do fun stuff, and that's where the flax come. It's like, well, if it costs me the same to buy a house, put someone in it, it may cost the same to go down the Gold Coast and spend the weekend at a hotel. Why not do something fun? So they don't fund cruise ships, they don't fund flights, but they fund the staff and what goes, I guess, towards putting someone in a space for that respite to happen. And I'll tell you what, if it's a child, you want to do something fun. So it might look like a holiday, but it really is just about giving a carer a break and also having that person supported out of their normal situation.
And we've got a text on 0487 993 222 in the weeks leading up to this very special broadcast with Jackson Hughes and myself, Bradon and Jackson. And he texted in from Proserpine up in central Queensland, saying that he'd heard stories of people using their NDIS funding to fly to Fiji or to go to the Proserpine Zoo. Is there any way that could potentially be claimed under the NDIS, or is that maybe someone not doing the right thing?
Well, you can't claim flights and have that paid for, but the way the system works is that it pays providers a chunk of money for a period of time. So for, say, 24 hours, someone can go and be supported somewhere else for a period of that time, and the provider gets a chunk of money to do that. Now, the provider might look at that and go, you know what, we can work out a deal where we can do that in a really fun way. Maybe we'll spend the money and to spend our own funds and try and get a deal with an airline or somewhere fun that we can do that. But that comes out of the provider's budget. It's not something that NDIS specifically fund. They'll just simply go, you know what, provider, we'll give you this chunk amount of money to support this person for 24 hours at a time. How you use those funds and the fun stuff you do, or whether you just do a really boring, sucky job, it's really up to you. And of course, you know, participants are going to want to do something fun if they can. And sometimes they just want to do something really mellow and really relaxing. So it's really about the provider and how they use those funds. And to be perfectly honest, I have no problem with providers being creative and flexible and being able to do something fun with those funds. So it's not really that NDIS fund air flights and cruise ships, but it's about providers kind of coming up with something innovative.
Here on ABC Sunshine Coast and ABC Gold Coast, River Knight is your guest. He's the co-founder of Developing Australian Community. But let's dive back into our next question, River, that has been provided by someone who was one of Jackson Hughes' extraordinary ordinaries, Finley Cole, who's a disability advocate.
My name is Finley Cole, and I live on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. I was born with quadriplegic cerebral palsy. I have recently had to go to the NDIS tribunal to fight to get a communication device replacement. 6 more hours a week of support to help with my traineeship and a support coordinator. It took 2 years to get to the tribunal, thousands of dollars in reports, and by the time we got there I had finished my traineeship. Why are people like me having to fight for everything we need? At the end of the process, the NDIS representative said I'm the kind of person the NDIS was created for, so why I'm having to fight? Is the NDIS just a box-ticking exercise so the government can say, look at what we did for disability?
Now, River, I know you've heard similar instances like this. How does hearing that from Finley make you feel, and what's your response to it?
Sadly, it's not surprising anymore. And that's the really frustrating thing. And the reason this has happened is because when we started NDIS, you would sit down with a professional who knew disability, was a caseworker, could be a social worker, and they would walk into your home, have a chat with you, and they could see what you needed. We knew that someone needs a communication device if they have communication support needs. It was a bit of a no-brainer. And now what we've done is we've taken the human part out, we've taken the professionals out, and unfortunately admin and bureaucrats are doing that planning process sometimes, and sometimes they're 2 states away on a phone, and the phone conversation is like a 20-30 minute thing, and sometimes the participant doesn't even know it's about to happen until just beforehand. So what happens is when you take that professional decision making and capacity out of case planning, this is the stuff that happens. You know, if I was an NDIS planner, I walked into that person's home, I would look at them, chat with them and say, you obviously use a wheelchair. Obviously, at some point, we're going to need to replace that. We're going to maintain that. You obviously need communication supports. These are non-negotiables. If you take away someone's communication supports, just like we saw the story recently with someone who lost their funding for interpreters for Auslan, you basically cut people off from the rest of the world. And it's not something that's negotiable. So what's happened is we've gone from this person-centred, human-focused process where people that know what they're talking about get this process done quick and fast, and we've gone to tick and flick, almost like we're doing car manufacturing. And these are the problems that we're going to keep seeing.